People, welcome back to Politics Watch. This is Sir P. Now, we've all been there and we've all heard the conversations. They happen at barbershops, hair salons, street corners, even some workplaces. A lot of people, a lot of Jamaicans, have long debated who is the biggest juggist of all times in Jamaica. A lot of people will tell you that the man who run off the place that they're from was the biggest. Jungle people will tell you Fidem Dan was the biggest. Mandeville people will tell you Fidem Dan was the biggest. St. Catherine people, everybody in their mind think Fidem Boss or Fidem era leader or somebody they know or somebody them hear of and hear about in music, especially dancehall music, is the biggest. See, when you look at your screen right now, this is the image you have of the typical Jamaican juggist. This is the image most of us were raised with. But this is what I have to tell people right now. The actual biggest juggist in Jamaican history doesn't even look anything like the men you're looking at on your screen right now. A matter of fact, most people, because I tested it before I did this video, most people don't even know the name of this man. They might know the organization he was affiliated with, but they don't know his name. See, before I go into the name of the individual and telling you just how much wealth this person acquired and just how powerful they were, I'm going to give you the rundown as to why perception is reality. See, there is a perception in Jamaica that the juggist mentality or the juggist individual is somebody that typically comes from a lower income background, then them get a bus, then them get rich, and then they make a name for themselves. They're usually very active in the party scene. This is how the more popular members became known. This is why everybody knows certain names like Roy Fall and them kind of name them, right? Because they were popular and they were mainstream. See, when I was growing up, the place where I came from, there were people like this, right? And a female member of my family actually dated one of these corporate era dons, right? Well, he wasn't a don in the sense that, he wasn't no Willie Agat or no Dodos, but a don in the sense that, when somebody have a bag of money and then naturally a lot of youths and a lot of people revolve around them, right? And at the time, as a young boy, looking at this individual when they would come around to visit my family member, I was fascinated. My mind was blown because at the time I had never seen anything like this, right? The cars him and his friend them used to drive, the jewelry they would wear, the places they would go, the type of liquor where they would drink. Only in the movies I would see things like this. So as a young man, at the time I thought to myself, well, this is the pinnacle. Surely this is the highest any human being can achieve, right? Because I'd never seen anything like this. And a lot of youths to this day, this is how they become fascinated with badness culture. Because when you come from a low income background and you see somebody that lives in your town, or even they don't even have to live in your community, you just have to see them on a daily basis, and you see how they live, you think, well, this is all there is to life. Surely this is the pinnacle of success. But as I became older, I started to realize that a lot of these men are the men who I would end up giving the title of 90 octanes to were not actually that rich in the grand scheme of things. They were rich by average Jamaican standards, of course. They were rich especially by ghetto people standards, right? But in the grand scheme of things, true wealth is when you can have an impact on your country's GDP. Let me say that again. True wealth, well, how you know somebody or an organization is truly wealthy is when it can have an impact on a country's GDP. That is why Pablo Escobar had true wealth, because his wealth could affect Colombia's GDP. In Mexico, the narco traffickers, their wealth can affect the Mexican GDP. So who in Jamaica was so wealthy from drugs that they had an actual impact on the national economy? Now I know a lot of people have already started thinking in their minds, okay, because if you would have been listening to me for a while, most people, and you know I'm not talking about no Roy Fowler or no Willie Agard or none of them Monday, right? And I know enough people from Mandeville, Clarendon, down that side, I go jump up and start calling him. Please stop. I know everybody think for them done are the biggest. Stop. I'm gonna talk about real money now. See, the biggest druggies in Jamaican history. I'm not just talking about having the money, but the money actually impacting the entire nation, was a man by the name of Brother Love. And that Love is spelled L-O-U-V. His real name was Thomas F. Riley Jr. See, when I said earlier that the person doesn't even fit the typical image you have of a druggist, which is a flashy ghetto youth, because be honest, that's the image you have in your mind. This individual, not only was he not Jamaican, not only was he not even black. See, this person came to Jamaica, took over an organization that already existed, right? Rebranded, right? Built a great storyline and went on to become so powerful, so influential, that there is clearly an attempt to erase this person from the history books. A matter of fact, I know a lot of people after this will go on Google and they will search for this person. Some would have already started. Let me give you the name again. Thomas Riley, Thomas F. Riley Jr., aka Brother Love. Love spelled L-O-U-V. This person even had their page deleted from Wikipedia. See, this individual was about 6'6", 6'7", freakishly tall white man, right, who came to Jamaica way back in the 70s, right, and he started to link up with the Ethiopian Zion Coptic Church. See, when I told you in my post telling you that this video was coming, and I said to you, get your granny or your grandpa to watch this video with you, you're going to need somebody from that era to actually listen to what I'm saying now and say to you, yeah man, a true Sir P attack. Because some of the things I'm about to say are going to sound fictional, right? And because, as I said, there has been an effort to erase this individual and some of the things that the Zionist Coptic Church did, because you can't go on Google and find some of the information I'm about to say, some people might dismiss it as fantasy. So talk to your older friend, talk to your big man friend them, and they will confirm some of the things I'm about to tell you. Now, the man himself, Thomas Riley, was actually born and raised in Boston, right? He was the eldest of 5 children. And the funny thing is, he was actually a Catholic altar boy, right? You know how, for some reason, all great stories seem to start with a Catholic altar boy, right? Now, he then went to the University of Miami, where he basically tried out for the whole basketball team, because, as I said, this guy was about 6'7", right? So incredibly tall, and naturally when you're that tall, people try to force you in a basketball. But he didn't make it, right? And then he went on to go into data processing and try his hands at a few other things. But you see, Thomas Riley came into his own when he landed in Kingston, Jamaica, because he then ran into some Rastaman or as he called them, ganja men, right? Now, at the time, remember, there were various sects and offshoots of the whole Rasta culture, right? So a lot of people then identified with it even though they didn't look like Rastaman, right? So he then started to link up with some elders from the Ethiopian Zion Coptic Church. And this is when Thomas Riley found his calling in life. See, he was one of the first white men to be accepted into the Coptic Church. At the time, it was almost unheard of, right? Now, here's the funny thing, people. The Coptic Church, for the most part, could, I guess, be described as a black nationalist movement or a black liberation movement, right? They were very pro-black. Marcus Garvey was one of their main symbols. They preached the whole concept of black unity and black power and all these things, right? And then out of nowhere, this 6'7" white man turned up in Jamaica, right? And he was allowed to be a part of the organization. Now, before that couldn't happen, but then there was a man by the name of Ivy, right? George Baker Ivy, right? He was the one who he was really the one who started to tell the other brethren that, let's open our minds and start to allow people into the organizations who were not black, right? And of course, this opened the doors for people like Thomas Riley, right, to become a member. But he didn't just become a member. See, he went on to rise to the top of the organization because he had one thing that I'm guessing either the other people didn't have or they didn't know how to execute, and that is he had an incredible vision and in that he could see the potential and the value of ganja, right? And he preached this to the others, right? He explained to them like, listen, this thing that you're sitting on in Jamaica, right? I know it's used for ceremonial purposes. I know man sit down and burn them herbs and reason, but listen, this right here is a very valuable asset. Oh, Thomas Riley was only starting. See, this is where the Coptics decided they were going to take things internationally. But where were they based, right? Because of course, as I said, a lot of people don't even know anything about the Coptics. Now, some people say, or the standard answer is that really Brother Love started kicking him little message them and him little preaching in a Mountain View, right? And then him at one point apparently was over there near Poppy near Hope River, right? But they moved to various places. At one point they were in St. Elizabeth, Manchester, all over Kingston. Because remember at the time people them they have to move man down. At one point them did up on captured land. But they eventually settled in a place called Coptic Heights in St. Thomas. Oh yes, St. Thomas, the ground zero for Jamaican rebellion, right? That parish that kick-started everything. How ironic that this is where the Coptics would settle. Now people, St. Thomas, the place where them buck up on St. Thomas was very rich in terms of resources. As a matter of fact, they managed to build an incredible self-sufficient farming infrastructure. People, the man them plant all kind of vegetables, fruits, peanuts, scallion, thyme, onion, peas, melons, pumpkin, okra, banana, sugarcane. Listen, anything you can think of, people, the man them was planting it over there in St. Thomas. But they also had all kind of beef and cattle, horses, goats, sheep. Nobody even talk about chicken, right? It was an incredible self-sufficient infrastructure they managed to build over there. At one point, they even had their own local lumber industry generating, right? Cutting wood from trees and all these things. They had coal. They had turned the location, people, into a little mini industrial complex, right? Now, this is where things started to get interesting as the Coptics started to grow. See, even though they were growing all kind of scallion and thyme and onion and all kind of fruits, that wasn't what made them so rich. See, Brother Love, Thomas Riley, and the Coptics were, let's just say, dealing with a product that at the time was Jamaica's real green gold. Remember when people used to call banana green gold? See, this was the actual green goal. People, the Coptics and Thomas Riley started to move herbs at a level that at the time was unprecedented, and to this day it has never been repeated. See, the US government will tell you that the Coptics made billions upon billions of dollars selling weed. And you have to bear in mind that this was happening in the 1970s. So if you start adjusting for inflation, that money is even higher today. Now people, just how rich were the Coptics? See, in an interview in 1979, Edward Seaga said that the only thing keeping Jamaica right now is just a little sensimilia. Those were his exact words, or sensimania. Edward Seaga, Michael Manley, those were the two prominent politicians at the time in the 1970s. But at the time, the Jamaican economy was hanging on for dear life. The thing that kept the economy from drowning, the thing that provided jobs for thousands and thousands of Jamaicans was ganja. Now, I'm not saying this to push any agenda. All I'm stating is an absolute fact that it was ganja that saved the Jamaican economy from dropping flat on its face in its 1970s, and it was Thomas Riley and the Ethiopian Coptic Church that was pushing it. See, the reason why I wanted you to get your granny or your big man friend or your big woman friend who was around during this time is because they would remember that a lot of them went to school because of the Coptics. People talk about, yo, my dad sent picnic to school, my dad sent the community, forget about communities. I'm talking about entire parishes. I'm talking about entire cities being funded by the Coptic Church. A lot of people would also remember those textbooks that were provided by the Coptics. Some of them even had a picture of a ganja leaf on the textbook. How many people can picture that? Picture children going to school, little picnic going to school, and the notebook of them writing, the cover have a ganja leaf on it. That is how influential the Coptics had become. The Coptics were so rich that the amount of land that they owned in Jamaica, they confessed or they claimed they had over 10,000 acres of land in Jamaica at one point, and that is just what they admit to. 10,000 acres. See, people, the biggest druggies most people talk about, as I said, the popular ones, the well-known ones, the ones you hear about in dancehall, the ones you see movies being made of. None of them, I repeat, none of them push herbs or push drugs at the level that Thomas Riley and the Coptics did it at. A matter of fact, a lot of the people who would go on to become dons in Jamaica actually sat down and studied how the Coptics made money. They were really the pioneers. You see, when I asked who do you think is the biggest druggist of all time in Jamaica, the names that you were throwing out, that most people were throwing out, they sat down with a notebook and a pencil and learned from Thomas Riley and Ethiopian Zion Coptic Church. Now, Thomas Riley was a strange individual because, as I said, he was a white man. But this man was going around proclaiming that the inherently white people had destroyed places like Jamaica, and he was pushing weed as almost a form of reparations. He was saying, listen, my people had done this to these people, and this is how we can make things right. He actually promoted the Black Power movement. He actually was Marcus Garvey, was actually his idol. Now, the question a lot of people ask is, was he being genuine? Did he really believe all these things he was saying? Did he really have all this love for black people that he was pushing? Did he really see Marcus Garvey, right, as this great man, right, and this great leader who people should aspire to be like and follow? Or was he just trying to be safe because he was surrounded by predominantly black people and he wanted to keep them happy, right? And of course, he couldn't do that pushing any white supremacist agenda. So that is the question that a lot of people have asked. And this is the question that split and divide some people and Thomas Riley. Was this man for real? Some people will tell you there's no way this 6'7" white boy could come to Jamaica, right, and just so happen to fall in love with the black culture, right, to the point where he starts to literally turn his back and diss his own people, right, and start to reject the culture that he was from and accept another one as his own, right? That is the big question mark that hangs over Thomas Riley. Was he genuine, or was he one of the greatest liars and pretenders in history, right? Because that is what he would need to be, to pull off what he managed to pull off. And if you, as I'm speaking, I want you to look at the pictures that you see coming up on your screens, because I want you to just imagine at the time this group of spiritual black leaders, and then standing next to them is this ridiculously tall 6'7" white American man who is now going around preaching black dominance and black power and black structure, right? I just want you to imagine how people at the time must have been so confused seeing this. However, it worked. It worked because just like in the 1970s, just like now, just till thy kingdom come, money talks. And the Coptics had a lot of it. A lot of it. Now, as I said, when you go and do a little research after this about Thomas Riley, you will notice his Wikipedia page is missing. And you will notice Jamaican politicians do not acknowledge Thomas Riley. Now, don't you think this is a bit strange? Remember, as I said, in the 1970s, Jamaican politicians, Michael Manley, Edward Seaga actually said it on record that it was ganja that kept the Jamaican economy alive. Ganja that was being pushed by the Ethiopian Coptic Church. Now, for somebody and a group of people who were so influential to the point where they literally sent entire parishes of children to school, gave money to build schools, gave money to build roads, it is rather interesting that they've been essentially erased from the history books, right? You will find, when you're looking online for somebody's information, and I hope you go and look for it, you will see that you only find peace here and peace there, right? A lot of the things I got from when I was making this video, I had to actually speak to people who actually lived through it. People were telling me that at the time, some of the things these people were telling me sound like something out of a movie. The Coptics sounded like they were playing on the same level as people like Escobar. We're talking about billions of US dollars. We're talking about entire communities being built, schools getting thrown up in no time, clinics getting built in no time. As soon as you go to them and they say, listen, we need money to do this, it was done in no time. How could people so influential, how could somebody so influential and wealthy get erased to the point where most people, especially most young people, don't know about them? And then when you couple it with things such as the fact that even the Wikipedia page has been deleted, then you have to see that there clearly is some kind of agenda to erase what the Coptics did. Now, think about it. Nowadays, any and everybody get a Wikipedia page. Hell, if you clap your hands too long on one of these talent shows like X Factor, then you might end up with a Wikipedia page. But Thomas Riley, the man who led the Ethiopian Coptic Church to become one of the most profitable herb smuggling organization in history, does not have a page, right? You have to see this cannot be by chance. Now, one of the things that was fascinating in terms of how the Coptics made their money, and was that the fact that it didn't come with violence. Let me say that again. When the Coptics were making their money, think about your average garrison in Jamaica right now. As soon as any kind of money start make, whether it's through extorting taximan or lotto scamming, what usually happens is chaos and bloodbath. Now, while the Coptics were making their money, they were doing it strictly like a business. They were running they were running the ganja business like business run business sell like shoes or clothes or anything like that. It was so mainstream and so smooth that it was not coupled with the chaos and the violence that is usually surrounded by modern day herb smuggling. Because we know the drug game can be very bloody and messy, right? But that didn't seem to affect the Coptics and how they made their money, right? So at one point I was thinking, well, maybe because of the destruction that followed it. But when I looked around and I checked the numbers and I asked people, they were saying, listen, yeah, man might get dasher here and there, right? But that was mainly at the lower level. But in terms of the Ethiopian Coptic Church, they were not really pushing a violence agenda. They were simply all about their herbs. So people, if you know somebody who was around during that time in the 70s, ask them about the Coptic Church. The man, Thomas Riley, most people probably know him as Coptic. A lot of Jamaicans just refer to him as Coptic. They don't know that Coptic is actually the name of the organization, Ethiopian Zionist Coptic Church, but the name of the man was Thomas Riley Jr. That man right there, people, is the biggest juggist in Jamaican history. He was the one who laid the foundation for all the others, including the 116s who would go on to become big juggies themselves. See, there are a lot of powerful 116s now who some people were throwing out their names and saying, him Serpia, him attack. Yes, a lot of those people that you're throwing out their names, they were druggists as well, right? And them washed their money and go mainstream and became 116s. But the man who laid the foundation and the blueprint for them and who made far more money than them was Thomas Riley and the Ethiopian Zionist Coptic Church. Now I know this video is going to trigger a lot of debate. As I said, a lot of people, especially people who've never even heard of the Coptics and have never even heard the name Thomas Riley, are going to cause chaos in the comment section and tell me, you don't know what you're talking about. My Dan are the biggest Dan, and my Dan over here, so my Dan used to give a 100 car, and my Dan used to have 500 women, and my Dan used to just breed 500 women and buy them 500 horse and all kind of story. People, as I said, Thomas Riley Jr. and the Ethiopian Zionist Coptic Church were the biggest juggies in Jamaican history. Patreon squad, big up on yourself. Please like, comment, and share the video. Bless.